Today we're talking about wetlands.
Yeah, they might not be as glamorous as a coral reef or as majestic as a rainforest,
True.
but wetlands are absolutely crucial to the health of our planet.
Totally. Like, they clean our water, they prevent floods, they're home to a ton of different species.
It's kind of amazing how much they do.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Okay,
How do these soggy wonderlands actually clean our water?
so think of it like a natural filter.
Okay.
You've got plants, you've got soil, even microscopic organisms all working together.
To trap the bad stuff.
Exactly. Pollutants flow in and they get trapped by all that stuff in the wetland.
So it's kind of like a giant natural water treatment plant.
Yeah, except way more energy efficient.
I was going to say, no energy bills for Mother Nature.
Right.
Now, how effective is this natural filtration compared to, say, a man-made water treatment plant?
It's surprisingly effective. They can remove tons of pollutants, sometimes even better than man-made systems.
Really?
Yeah, for example, you know how fertilizers from farms can pollute rivers and lakes?
Mm-hmm.
Wetlands can actually remove a lot of those excess nutrients.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
It is.
And I've even heard about some cities using wetlands to help treat their wastewater.
Oh yeah, it's called constructed wetlands.
So we're learning from nature.
Exactly. And it's a growing trend in urban planning. Cities are realizing that working with nature can actually be more effective and a lot cheaper than trying to fight it.
So it's a win-win. Speaking of wins, wetlands are also amazing for flood control, right?
Absolutely. Think of a giant sponge.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That's what wetlands are doing during a flood. All that soil and vegetation soaks up the excess water and then slowly releases it later.
So they're preventing those massive floods downstream.
Yeah.
But I've also heard that if you fill in wetlands, it can actually make flooding worse.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
How so?
Well, you see, in the past, people saw wetlands as wasted space, so they drained them or filled them in to build stuff.
Oh, I see.
But we're realizing now that those wetlands were actually doing a really important job by absorbing all that floodwater.
And without them,
Yeah, without them, the water has nowhere to go, and you end up with way worse flooding.
it's like we messed with nature's delicate balance.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so we've talked about clean water, we've talked about flood control, but wetlands are also incredible for biodiversity, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're teeming with life plants, animals, from tiny little microorganisms to big birds and mammals.
I bet there's some pretty unique creatures in there.
Oh, for sure. It really depends on the type of wetland, but you could find anything from alligators to otters to beavers.
Wow.
Oh, and don't forget about all the fish, insects, amphibians, and reptiles that call wetlands home.
It's amazing how life thrives in those environments.
It is.
But how do wetlands benefit people, especially those who don't live right next to them?
Well, we've already talked about clean water, right? But wetlands also protect our coastlines from erosion, they provide nurseries for fish populations, and they offer tons of recreational opportunities like bird watching and kayaking.
So they're not just good for the environment, they're good for us too.
Exactly.
It sounds like we need to start appreciating these soggy wonderlands a lot more.
We do. And there are a lot of people working hard to protect and restore these valuable ecosystems.
That's good to hear. And, speaking of global issues, we can't forget about climate change.
Right, climate change.
How do wetlands play into that?
Well, wetlands are what we call carbon sinks.
What does that mean?
It means they absorb and store tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Oh, okay.
So they're actually helping to mitigate climate change by reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in the air.
So protecting wetlands isn't just about biodiversity and clean water. It's also about fighting climate change.
Exactly. It's all connected.
It really is. This is eye-opening.
It is. It shows how interconnected everything is and how protecting these seemingly small ecosystems can have a global impact.
I'm definitely seeing wetlands in a whole new light now.
Me too. And you know what's really cool?
What's that?
Wetlands aren't just found in remote areas. They
Yeah.
can be a really important part of cities too.
Right. I was actually just thinking about
Yeah.
that. I read about a city that's using wetlands in their urban planning.
You're probably thinking of Colombo, Sri Lanka.
Colombo, yeah.
They've done an amazing job incorporating wetlands into the city.
I think I remember reading that it was actually named an international wetland city.
You're right. First capital city to get that title from the Ramsar Convention.
Wow. So a whole city recognized for its wetlands.
Pretty cool, right?
That's amazing. What are they doing that's so special?
Well, Colombo has really embraced the idea that wetlands aren't just areas to be drained or filled in for development.
Yeah.
They've realized that wetlands are valuable assets that can help with things like flood control and water purification.
And they can create beautiful green spaces, too.
Exactly. They've created a network of urban wetlands that act like natural sponges, soaking up excess rainwater and preventing flooding.
So instead of concrete channels and pipes, they're using nature.
Exactly.
It's brilliant. But how does that work in a city that's so densely populated?
It's definitely a challenge, but Colombo shows that it's possible to integrate nature into urban planning.
Yeah.
They've created parks and green spaces around these wetlands, which makes them really attractive places for people to relax and enjoy.
So it's like bringing a little bit of the countryside into the city.
Exactly.
I bet those green spaces are a welcome break from all the concrete.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And besides flood control and water purification, they also help cool the city, improve air quality, and provide habitats for wildlife.
So it's a win-win for everyone.
Absolutely.
Colombo's approach is really inspiring. Are there any other examples of cities using wetlands like this?
Oh, there are quite a few.
Oh, cool.
Another great example is the East Kolkata wetlands in India.
Okay, I've heard of those.
They're a huge network of wetlands just outside the city, and they play a crucial role in treating Kolkata's sewage.
Wait, they treat sewage with wetlands?
Yeah.
How does that work?
It's pretty amazing. The wetlands act like giant natural filtration systems.
So the sewage flows through the wetlands.
Yeah. And as it flows through, the plants and microorganisms in the wetlands break down the pollutants, cleaning the water naturally.
So nature is basically doing the work that would normally require a big, expensive treatment plant.
Exactly.
That's incredible. What happens to the treated water?
The treated water is used to cultivate fish ponds.
So they're creating a food source, too.
Yeah. It's a great example of how we can work with nature to solve our challenges.
I love that turning a problem into a resource.
Right. It shows how important it is to see wetlands as assets and not obstacles.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic for a second.
Sure.
Protecting wetlands can be tough, especially with all the pressure to develop land.
You're right. It's not always easy.
What are some of the biggest threats that wetlands are facing today?
Well, there's pollution, for one.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have drainage for agriculture and development and the introduction of invasive species.
Yeah. And climate change probably doesn't help either.
Yeah, climate change is a big concern too.
How so?
Rising sea levels and changes in rainfall patterns can really disrupt wetland ecosystems.
So it sounds like there are a lot of challenges.
There are, but there are also a lot of people working hard to protect these habitats.
That's good to hear.
We've got the Ramsar Convention promoting international cooperation, and many countries have their own national policies and programs to protect wetlands.
So there are efforts happening at all levels.
Exactly. And there are also lots of local and regional organizations working on the ground to restore degraded wetlands and educate the public.
It's good to know that people are fighting for these ecosystems.
It is.
But what about on an individual level? What can we do in our everyday lives to help protect wetlands?
Well, first of all, just learning about wetlands and the threats they face is a great first step.
Okay, so educate ourselves.
Yeah. And then we can support organizations that are working to protect them, either through donations or by volunteering our time.
So raise awareness and support conservation efforts.
Exactly. And there are also things we can do in our own homes and communities.
Like what?
We can be careful about what we pour down our drains, because pollutants can end up in waterways that feed into wetlands.
Right.
And we can choose to use eco-friendly cleaning products and fertilizers.
So even small changes in our habits can make a difference.
Absolutely. If you have a yard or garden, you can plant native species that are adapted to your local climate.
That would definitely reduce the need for watering and fertilizer.
Exactly. And you can also create a rain garden to help absorb rainwater and reduce runoff.
I love that idea. It's so cool to think that we can all contribute to wetland conservation.
You can.
Every little bit helps.
It really does. And remember, protecting wetlands isn't just about saving some far-off ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's about protecting the systems that keep us alive.
That's a good point.
It is.
This has been such a great conversation. I'm feeling really inspired to do my part to protect wetlands.
That's great to hear. And the more we learn about these ecosystems, the more we'll realize just how essential they are to all of us.
You know, it's incredible to think about all the work that wetlands do for us, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, they really are like the unsung heroes of the planet.
They are, quietly keeping our water clean, our air fresh, and protecting us from floods.
And yet, we often just see them as swamps or wastelands.
It's true, we don't always appreciate them.
That's why it's so important to educate people about the value of wetlands.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, you mentioned earlier that there's an international treaty dedicated to protecting wetlands.
Yeah, the Ramsar Convention.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. It was established back in 1971 in Ramsar, Iran.
Oh, wow. So it's been around for a while.
It has. It's a global agreement that aims to conserve and sustainably use wetlands all over the world.
So basically, it's a bunch of countries coming together and saying, hey, wetlands are important, we need to protect them.
Exactly. The convention recognizes how important wetlands are, not just for the environment, but for the economy and culture, too.
Right.
And it encourages countries to identify their most valuable wetland areas and manage them properly.
That makes sense. How many countries are part of this convention?
Over 170 as of today.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. It shows that there's a global commitment to protecting wetlands.
That's really encouraging. What about here in our own country? What are we doing to protect our wetlands?
Well, we have a national wetland conservation program that works to identify and protect important wetland areas.
Oh, okay.
And there are tons of local and regional organizations that are doing amazing work restoring degraded wetlands and teaching people about why they matter.
So there are efforts happening on all levels. That's good to hear.
It is.
But I'm
Yeah.
curious, what are some of the biggest challenges facing wetland conservation? It can't be easy.
You're right, it's not. One of the biggest challenges is balancing development with conservation.
Right. As cities grow and populations increase, there's more pressure to use that land for other things.
Exactly, like agriculture, housing, infrastructure.
So it's a constant balancing act between meeting human needs and protecting these valuable ecosystems.
It is. It requires careful planning, collaboration, and sometimes thinking outside the box.
Yeah. Like, I read about a project where they're creating artificial wetlands to filter pollutants from stormwater runoff.
Oh, yeah. Constructed wetlands.
So cool.
They're becoming more and more popular because they can mimic the natural filtration power of real wetlands.
So it's like we're learning from nature and using those principles to solve our own problems.
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about wetland conservation. It's not just about protecting pristine wilderness, it's also about finding ways to incorporate wetlands into our human landscapes.
I love that. This whole conversation has been really inspiring.
Mm.
Definitely feeling more motivated to do my part for wetlands.
That's fantastic to hear. The more we learn about these incredible ecosystems, the more we realize how important they are to our planet and to ourselves.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, what are some specific things our listeners can do to support wetland conservation?
Great question. There are so many ways to get involved no matter where you live or how much time you have.
Okay, I'm ready for some action items.
First off, just learn more about wetlands, read books, articles, visit a local wetland area.
Education is always a good starting point.
It is. Then you can support organizations working to protect wetlands, either by donating or volunteering your time.
So raise awareness, support conservation efforts, get our hands dirty.
Exactly. And in your everyday life, think about the choices you make.
Like what?
Like using eco-friendly cleaning products, conserving water, and cutting back on fertilizers and pesticides.
So it's about recognizing that even small actions can add up to a big difference.
They do. And don't underestimate the power of simply spreading the word. Talk to your friends and family about wetlands, share information on social media, advocate for policies that protect them.
So make wetland conservation part of our everyday conversations.
Yes. Remember, we're all in this together. By working together, we can make sure that wetlands thrive for generations to come.
I love that. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the world of wetlands. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for them.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, every action counts.
Well said. Before we go, let's leave our listeners with 5 English phrases they can use to talk about wetlands and their importance.
Sounds good.
Number 1, wetlands, areas where water covers the soil, either all year or just part of the year.
Number 2, biodiversity. The variety of life found in a particular habitat or ecosystem.
Number 3, filtration, the process of removing impurities from a liquid, like water.
Number 4, conservation. The act of protecting and preserving natural resources.
And number 5, sustainable, using resources in a way that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into wetlands. We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to take action.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.